Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the most creative and hilarious phonies or non-words that have stayed on Scrabble boards. In this video, we'll be featuring a number of phonies played by none other than Matt Canik. Now, for those of you not familiar with Matt, he's a very strong player who's well known for his creative strategical skills, and one of the ways in which Matt is very creative is coming up with these very fun and plausible phonies that often get by his opponents. And this position here is no exception. Here Matt's in a very close game, and he's got a great rack with 2 blanks and an S, so what he'd really love to do is play a bingo and get a 50-point bonus and take a commanding lead. And that's exactly what he does, finding the 7-letter word of Vamanos, V-A-M-A-N-O-S, down the end column, hooking an S to make storages and scoring 69 points. Now, Vamanos is a fairly well-known term. It's a Spanish exclamation, meaning let's go. You might hear it at a sporting event or something similar, used as a shout of encouragement for the competitors. However, the ironic thing is that Matt was hoping his opponent would recognize this connotation of Vamanos and thus believe it was an acceptable word in Scrabble. However, his opponent Trevor was actually not familiar with the term Vamanos, and that resulted in a pretty hilarious sequence of events which Matt describes here in his commentary. Trevor was completely befuddled by this play, which is completely understandable given he didn't recognize the term, and multiple times asked Matt to confirm what the 2 blanks were, because with an M and an N, which is what Matt made these 2 blanks, Trevor just couldn't bring himself to believe that this was a word. Nevertheless, he ultimately did still decide to let this play stay on the board, so in somewhat bizarre fashion, Matt's tactic, or his intention, of playing a word that his opponent would recognize as something from the real world failed. His opponent didn't recognize it, but yet still allowed this to stay on the board. So really bizarre sequence of events, but in any case, this play did work out for Matt as it stayed on the board, and Matt would ultimately go on to win this game. Now, his next play here is just as ridiculous, if not even more so. Here he's playing John Karras, who's a strong expert level player, and it's again a tight game, and Matt has a blank on his rack, so he'd really love to bingo here and take a lead in this game. And that is once again exactly what he does. He finds the play of Feofdom, F-E-O-F-D-O-M, for 81 points. Now, you guys guessed it, Feofdom is absolute bogus. This is not a word, and Matt's comment here is pretty legendary. He says, "This may be the worst phony in the history of my life." Now, I think I'm going to have to let the viewers decide whether this is an accurate comment after seeing all of the phonies in this video. It's also debatable how you define the worst phony. Does worst mean the most implausible, the most creative? I'm not really sure, but definitely after you guys watch the rest of this video, feel free to share in the comment section whether or not you do believe that Feofdom is the worst phony that Matt has ever played in his life. Now, in this next example, Matt is playing none other than Jackson Smiley. Jackson's another top player who many viewers are probably familiar with from some of my other videos. He's also well known for his creative phonies that he often gets by his opponents. However, in this case, Jackson is actually not the person playing the phony, he's actually the victim. And here, Matt just had a bingo blocked. Prior to Jackson's play of Duo, Matt would have had the bingo of mortally available as an 8-letter word over here down the J column. So Matt had a valid bingo blocked and instead decides to play a phony bingo, making Lamitrol, L-A-M-I-T-R-O-L, for 90 points on a double-double through the eye and grifted. And another funny comment here by Matt. Matt was aware that Jackson was, as Scrabble players would like to say, on tilt. He had a tough last game, and as a result, Matt decided that he was going to try to take advantage of that and play a phony on Jackson if he needed to, thinking that being on tilt and aggravated, Jackson might not challenge. And this gambit worked very handsomely as Matt turned what probably would have been about a 20-point play into a 90-point bingo that stayed on the board. So pretty crazy stuff. Now, in this position, we're once again very early in the game. In fact, it is the first turn of the game, and it is Matt to play. He's up against Steven Sneed, another strong player, and Matt's got a fairly mediocre rack here. He's got some good bingo tiles like the E, N, R, and T, but overall he's got a lot of one-pointers that don't make a bingo, and he's not going to be able to score a lot of points. So he could do something like log here for 8 points, keeping E, N, R, T. He could play a word like longer getting rid of more tiles, but also still only scoring like 16 points or so. And none of these options appealed to Matt. Instead, he slaps down tongler for 68 points. Now, you guys guessed it, tongler is not a word, and Matt's logic here, as he describes in his commentary, is pretty notable. He knew that if he was going to play something like tongler, if he wanted to get away with it, he would need to do it very quickly. The logic is this is a pretty high probability rack. It has a lot of commonly occurring low point tiles, so this is the type of rack that a top expert like Matt would be expected to recognize very quickly, and he'd be expected to find a bingo if there was a valid one very quickly. So if Matt took like 2 minutes to play tongler, then that would arouse a lot of suspicion from his opponent, Steven. So with that in mind, Matt decided if he played this very quickly and confidently, then Steven, if he weren't entirely sure on whether this was valid, would be more likely to trust Matt's knowledge and allow this to stay on the board. And that's exactly what happens here. Steven does decide, after holding the play, to allow this to stay on the board, and Matt turns a pretty mediocre 16-point play or something like that into an opening 68-point bingo. So pretty crazy stuff. Now, in this next position, we're once again very early in the game, and Matt's got a reasonable-looking rack. He's got A and RST, which are all great bingo tiles, but he's got the M and the W to go with it, so what he could really use is another vowel. And he sees just that on the board with the O in Coley, and plays manworts, M-A-N-W-O-R-T-S, through the O. Now, manworts is not a word. It actually does resemble some valid words, such as fanworts, F-A-N-W-O-R-T-S. So it's a pretty reasonable phony, and once again, Matt has a pretty hilarious comment. At this point in the tournament, I've been out-bingoed 10-2 through 5 games. I'm 5-0, meaning he has 5 wins and 0 losses despite that, but I'm sick and tired of it. I knew this was phony, but played it anyway. It wasn't even held. So, once again, possibly because this does look fairly similar to some valid words, that may be why his opponent Caesar didn't recognize this as a phony and let this stay on the board. But nevertheless, a pretty hilarious word of manworts stays on a Scrabble board. Now here, Matt's in a pretty tough position. He's playing another expert, Doug Riblet, and Doug has just bingoed with Regulate to take an 88-point lead. It's quite late in the game, there's only a couple tiles left in the bag, and Matt really needs to bingo here if he wants to get back into this game, but unfortunately he can't do that, at least validly, with his rack of ACHINOR. However, Matt finds the play of Corianth, C-O-R-I-A-N-T-H, through the T in Radiance for 76 points. And as Matt explains here, he has no idea where he really came up with this. Possibly it was a combination of Corinth, which is an ancient Greek civilization, and maybe something like Perianth, P-E-R-I-A-N-T-H, which is another valid word, which I believe means a part of a flower. I'm not really sure where this came from, but in any case, it actually turns out to be a very clever play, because it puts Doug in a tricky spot. If Doug challenges Corianth and it comes back valid, then Doug is going to lose his turn, and Matt, with his draw of ABBIR, is actually going to win the game by playing the word rabbit over here to the T in Regulate, or the blank T, I should say, playing out and winning the game. So unless Doug is positive this isn't valid, he actually can't safely challenge here, because he'd risk losing the game. So that's exactly what happens. Doug lets this stay on the board, plays Ruin from this R, and then after Matt goes out with Rabbit, Doug barely ekes out the win, 369 to 367. So this turned out to be a huge saver of spread by Matt playing this phony of Corianth instead of not bingoing on that turn. Now, in this position, Matt's got a small lead, and he's got a bit of a clunky rack with a lot of high point tiles, 2 H's, a P, and a V, but he's got a nice play he can make through this A in Peking of the word pharaoh, P-H-A-R-A-O-H. That would score 30 points and play right here, spelling P-H-A-R-A-O-H, and be a pretty good play for him in this situation. And that's exactly what Matt does, or I should say that's almost exactly what Matt does. He does play pharaoh, but plays it here, spelling it P-H-A-R-O-H. Now, the correct spelling of pharaoh, as I was just mentioning, is P-H-A-R-A-O-H. And it is a notoriously difficult word to spell. I've seen it misspelled P-H-A-R-O-A-H before, which I believe originated from the well-known racehorse American Pharaoh, who was a Triple Crown winner a few years back, spelling its name P-H-A-R-O-A-H. I'm not actually sure why the racehorse's name is misspelled. Perhaps somebody who knows the backstory behind that can let me know in the comment section. But in any case, the correct spelling of pharaoh is Pharaoh. I've never actually seen it spelled this way before until I stumbled across this game. But hey, you know, there's a first time for everything, and Matt wasn't the only one who didn't know how to spell this word. His opponent, Yukiko, who's a pretty strong player herself, let this stay on the board. So, as we see, pharaoh, once again here, lives up to its reputation as a notoriously difficult word to spell. Now, in this final example, Matt finds himself down 131 points in a very bad position playing against Sal Piro. Now, Sal sadly passed away recently, but he was a very strong expert who played hundreds and hundreds of tournaments. Now, in this position, Matt does have a valid bingo of re-gauges through this U in curlew on the D column, but he misses this opportunity, instead finding the word reggaes on his rack and playing it over here, putting an S onto Durlings. Now, as you may guess, Durlings is not a valid word. There are a lot of ing words in Scrabble that do take S's, but Durling is not one of them. However, this is phony number 1 that gets by Sal. And yes, you guessed it, this is very much not the last phony that gets played in this game. Sal responds with wait and is still in a very good position. Matt is down 94 points and has a pretty clunky rack. He's got duplicate I's, duplicate N's, and duplicate P's. Normally, one set of duplicates is bad enough, and when you have 3, you're usually in for a pretty tough slog getting rid of them. However, not in this case. Matt decides to get rid of them all at once, playing the bingo of Peptinin, P-E-P-T-I-N-I-N, through the T that Sal just opened in wait. Now, this play, as we'll see, is both useful, of course, in that it gives Matt 63 points from this real clunker of a rack, but it also sets a clever trap for Sal later in the game, which we're going to see play out in a couple turns. Now, the next couple turns, for a change of pace, do actually all involve valid words. Sal responds with hobo, Matt with koji, Sal dumps some vowels. Matt burns his blank with vans for 46 points. Sal plays off a couple tiles. Matt plays glady, and then finally Sal fishes again. Matt plays vex, and Sal attempts to bingo out with Fosters and Peptinins. Now, I mentioned that trap earlier, and this is where it comes into play. Unfortunately for Sal, Peptinin is not valid, and Peptinins as well is most certainly not valid. So Matt challenges, this comes off the board, and Matt would go on to play out and win this game in pretty crazy fashion. You'll recall that Matt was down 131 points a few turns ago. Well, he finishes with a 92-point victory. So if we do the math, that's a 223-point swing in the span of what was well less than half of this game. So pretty crazy stuff, and Matt got away with 2 phonies and then challenged off a hook on one of the phonies. So pretty creative exploitation by Matt of the phonying technique here, and it certainly paid off quite well. And yeah, there you have it, guys. That is the last example of this video, so hope you guys enjoyed this, and shout out to Matt for always producing such great content for us. And yeah, as I always mention with these videos, they seem to be some of my most popular, and I really do love making them. But at some point, I will run out of good content, so if any of you have recent hilarious phonies that you've gotten away with or seen other players get away with, please do let me know about them. Send me the words or send me the links to the games on cross tables ideally, and I will be sure to feature them in one of these videos coming forward. So yeah, that's it for this one, folks. Thanks again for watching, and have a good one. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.